Hello and welcome to Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. My name is Ben and with me is...
Brian O'Connor.
Ooh, yeah, nah. Still hurts, man. Still hurts. I think you're more of a Tech to me.
Oh, I believe it's pronounced Tej.
Tej, sorry. It's hard to get the pronunciation of this movie because very few people speak clearly.
Point is, my actual name is Jim, and this week we watched Too Fast, Too Furious.
So many twos and so much furiousness. So let's get straight into it. It's my pick, so my synopsis. So here we go. Too Fast, Too Furious follows Brian O'Connor, Paul Walker, as he builds a new life in Miami after his fallout with the LAPD. Now an outlaw, Brian is pulled back into law enforcement when he's offered a deal to go undercover and bring down a notorious drug lord, Carter Verone. To help him with his job, Brian enlists his childhood friend, Roman Pierce, Tyrese Left Cheek Gibson, a fast-talking ex-con with a grudge against him. Together, the two infiltrate Verone's operation as drivers, using their skills behind the wheel to gain his trust while secretly working to expose his criminal enterprise. While the stakes are high and the chemistry between Brian and Roman is electric, there's a lingering sense of something that's possibly left behind. A bond that once defined Brian's path feels absent, leaving him to navigate this mission in uncharted emotional territory as the pair barrel through intense street races and dangerous heists. Brian's unspoken connection to the world he left behind quietly lingers, shaping his choices and hinting at unfinished business and possibly a family he's left behind.
Before we get any further, what on earth was your ChatGPT prompt for that? Because that is not quite the movie we watched.
The movie I watched, it was give me a synopsis of the movie with a small hint without naming Vin Diesel that maybe something's missing.
Yeah, okay. So, because the problem with that synopsis is I think that's the movie that this movie wanted to be.
100%. 100%.
And yet, with you saying this is what happened, it's like, that's not actually what happened in this movie.
Is the one pager they took to the studio and said, this is the movie we're making.
Except then they didn't make half of that. So all of the emotional connection to the previous film is stripped out, which is something we'll talk about when we get to the film itself. So hit me with some facts, though.
So facts. Released 2003. I was so surprised about how long ago this movie was released. These movies are being made for so long that I've just lost track of like the Fast and Furious timeline. Directed by John Singleton, Boys in the Hood, Higher Learning, and Four Brothers. Written by Michael Brandt and Derek Haas. These guys seem to just write everything together. Starring Paul Walker, Tyrese Left Cheek Gibson, Eva Mendes, Cole Hauser, Chris Ludacris Bridges, and James Remar. Can I just say, even though this isn't his best movie, I always forget about James Remar, and every time I see him, I'm like, I really like James Remar.
Really?
I like him in stuff. Like, he just provides the same thing in every film, don't get me wrong, but I like that thing.
I gotta say, I do. I get a certain, I'm going to call it a nostalgia twang now when I see James Remar in something, because I'm like, I guess it's a cop.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I think technically, truth be told, in this one, I think he's supposed to be a customs agent, but close enough. Like,
federal customs or something. The other thing is the Cole Hauser, who plays the bad guy in this movie. I was watching this whole movie going, I know this guy.
Pitch Black, bro.
It's Pitch Black. It's Pitch Black. Also, he's now like in Yellowstone. Like he's like really big in that. But yeah, Pitch Black. It took me ages to figure it out.
So obviously we were definitely going to get to the Fast and Furious franchise at some point doing this podcast. I'm a little surprised that you decided to start at Too Fast, Too Furious.
It's the only place to start, because it is the least important Fast and the Furious movie. You got to build it up, right? So, like, you can't start with number one because that kicks it off. And number three, even though, like, it doesn't really have the main cast in it, really revitalized the series and kicked us off into that new generation that we got now. This movie was attempting to be a direct sequel. There's very little evolution. There's a little bit of action evolution, but there's very little story and character evolution. It bears no witness to what this franchise becomes. And I find it really fascinating as a piece of cinema, as a movie.
Yeah,
because
It's interesting because, this movie becomes more interesting now as a historical
Yeah,
artifact rather than an actual film in and of itself. So, functionally, I was a big fan of the first The Fast and the Furious when it came out. And obviously, that movie has a pretty unique tone in the sense that it is quite straight laced. It's quite
yeah,
serious for its subject matter. It's telling a fairly human story. And sure, it has moments of fun and it definitely has moments of action, but it's really by design sort of a smaller, kind of dirty, street racing movie. And I think that's why it resonated with so many people, even outside of car culture, which of course is something I have absolutely no knowledge of whatsoever. I'll freely admit that. But I do love movies, and I think the first one did strike a chord with people globally. So when I showed up to see Too Fast, Too Furious, kind of expecting and hoping for more of the same, what we were presented with instead at the time in 2003 was an action movie.
yeah,
And that you could pretty much put a full stop on that, right? We got an action movie. And much as I like action movies, it's the sort of thing where I remember being bitterly disappointed with this film at the time because obviously there is almost no connective tissue to the first film. And look, it did not do this, but it feels like one of those films where they had a script for generic action movie one
yeah.
and then said, hey, we have a franchise, this Fast and Furious thing. We could probably mash those two things together. That happens in Hollywood all the time. Now, it didn't happen in this time, but it feels like it could have because this is such a, from a plot perspective, generic action movie about drugs and cops.
Yeah, and look, it's 100% that, and there is DNA from this film in the later films with characters that carry over and things like that. And the racing is actually, I found it very fun. I honestly, I remembered the bulk of this film, but I never remembered any of the details of the scenes. Like, I know this happens, I know this happens, I know this happens, but I couldn't remember how it happened. I enjoyed the racing. I thought it was silly. I thought, excuse the pun, it was a bit ludicrous. Um, and it was, I actually probably enjoyed this movie on this watching more than I've enjoyed it in the past.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit wild to me. Like, it shouldn't really do that, especially the type of film this is. But yeah, it is. It's not a good film.
And that's the
Like,
thing. I should say, I said that that was how I felt about it at the time, back
yeah,
in 2003. However, I haven't said how do I feel about it
yeah,
now.
it's
Look,
true.
in the intervening years from that time to now, I now reflect far more fondly on this film than I did at the time that it came out. And I would say that my thoughts and feelings on the movie really started to change probably around 2007, 2008, when this series was becoming a bit more mature, and this then became part of the history of the series. And at that point, I started to be able to reflect a bit more fondly on it. And I kind of had the same, it's a little bit of the same journey that I had when we talked about the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, where when they came out, I wasn't super thrilled. And then as more Spider-Man movies got released, I actually reflected more fondly upon the older ones. And of course, the two big things that definitely changed my feelings on the film is the fact that Paul Walker has now tragically passed away, and so has John Singleton, the
Yeah,
director. So that was something that when I watch it now, I'm tapping back into these two creative people, one an actor, one a filmmaker, and I'm enjoying rewatching what they have to offer and what they brought from an artistic perspective, even in something as crazy and commercial and over the top as this particular film. So, at the same time, some of those initial gripes that I had with the movie, like they're not going away.
yeah,
Functionally, this movie does suffer by not really addressing the issues of the first film. And it also does, in my opinion, the character of Brian O'Connor a fairly big disservice in the sense that he, and this is not Paul Walker's fault at all as an actor, it's just not in the script at all. He has no reflections really, aside from a couple of very small scenes where they briefly talk about something that happened in LA. What happened to him in that first film doesn't seem to really dictate much of his journey in this movie.
We've got a character at the end of the last movie whose life is literally flipped upside down because of a decision they made. They made a decision to walk away from two lives, a life of the cop he was and the life of the family he found. I use family funnily in a little way, but he walked away from two of those things, and then he has no grit to him. He has no kind of anguish. He has none of that sort of stuff. He kind of almost reverts back to the start of Fast and the Furious, where he's really kind of that goofy street racer guy who just happens to be a better racer now. Like he's like the guy instead of Dominic Toretto being the guy, and it's a weird switch. It's almost like I don't know the truth behind this. I actually deliberately didn't research a few things in this film because I just expected you to possibly know the answers. This film was written, it felt like almost as a vindictive, Vin was too expensive, so we're just going to write him out of the movie. That's what it feels like.
Not quite. It's an interesting project because obviously, if you like, the shepherd of the Fast and Furious movies was Neil H. Moritz, the super producer who's been on for all of them. And functionally, the brief with Too Fast, Too Furious, and John Singleton has talked about this when they brought him on board to direct the movie, was make it fun. That was what he was told. His goal was to make it fun. And in a way, we can see Universal as a studio attempting to move, and you can excuse this pun, a little too fast with their goal of transitioning this series into a big summer action franchise. That was what they wanted. They wanted
Did they
this
Schumacher Singleton?
No, not quite. So they said to John Singleton, you got one job and that job is to make it fun. But because they hired John Singleton, he obviously also makes movies about black culture. So he's going to do that anyway because that's who he is and that's what the kind of stories he likes to tell. So that kind of becomes the unique flavor that he brings to the actual movie. However, of course, the lead character of Brian O'Connor is not deep into that culture. So it does become interesting to watch him sort of play against that culture. And you could say whether or not he, works well in that scene or whether or not it's a little bit of a clash is kind of in the eye of the beholder, but it is interesting. The other thing that I would say on a filmmaking perspective is they had 3 versions of this script. They had 3 different versions, and one of those versions was a version where Vin returns, and this is the version where obviously he doesn't. So it was something where it was a very commercial product. They wanted to make it fun. John Singleton basically had that brief and a budget, and then he got to go make his movie, so he did what he was going to do. We didn't have Vin Diesel. Now, Vin Diesel, interestingly, has really changed his perspective on how he makes these movies, which if you look a little further down the line is perhaps, well, not perhaps, we have some direct quotes to realize this is the case, that this is why a filmmaker like Justin Lin actually found he couldn't work in this franchise anymore after doing so many of them. So, and it's basically because Vin Diesel said he didn't like the script, therefore he turned it down. And that's actually fair enough. That's something that a lot of actors have done in Hollywood over the decades that Hollywood's been around. I didn't like the script, so I turned it down. It is, however, kind of an old way of thinking of the movie. And Vin Diesel in particular would develop and grow as not only an actor, but also as a producer to say, just because I don't like the script now, by the time we're done, I'm going to like the script. Yeah. So it was really a case, and that is functionally something that other filmmakers have reported to struggle with, the fluidity of the script, because people like Vin Diesel are making changes as they go, which is something that is not uncommon, but it can certainly obviously be difficult to deal with when you have hundreds of millions of dollars on the line and this movable feast of a production.
And when you get to a franchise like this, where it becomes impossible to make the movie without that person, like, they have the power, they have all that
Yes.
say. So yeah, it does become this kind of behemoth where you are beholden to an actor who, outside of this franchise, doesn't hold a massive amount of power in the industry. Like, he's liked and he's in stuff, but yeah, it's a fascinating watch. With this movie, though, there's a few things that I find absurd and that kind of almost are foreshadowing to
Yes.
future films.
Absolutely.
And that is the use of, like, technology. One of those is the spear harpoon gun that disables the
Yes,
electronics in racing cars.
the immobilizer. And it's
Yeah.
funny because the immobilizer is something that is functionally straight out of science fiction. It's this harpoon spear gun EMP, and it's actually not the last time we would see this
No.
kind of device in a Fast and Furious movie. But of course, this was a situation where we did that. Let's just keep the puns rolling, Ben. We did a handbrake turn from a gritty street movie to EMP guns in harpoons, and we did it within one movie. And obviously, the audience didn't react very well to it, myself included. What Justin Lin was so good at, who is, of course, the filmmaker who came on from Tokyo Drift and then really did most of the heavy lifting throughout the rest of the Fast and Furious movies. He didn't direct all of them, but he did most of them, to be honest. So what he was so good at doing was actually, over the course of a few different movies, gradually ramping up these more, over the top elements so that they didn't sort of hit us all at once, and they were more neatly integrated into the lore of the franchise, so that the audience didn't quite realize as much what was happening until it had already happened. So whereas this one, of course, was gritty movie to EMP immobilizer grappling harpoon gun, and it was like, what?
Like, the height of technology in the first film was like NOS and computer screens in cars. Like, oh my God, it's got a computer in it and he manages the NOS manually. That's crazy. Oh my gosh, there's a sci-fi gun and it just took out that car. Like, it's a bit of a leap.
Yeah.
The other thing that they do, I think, actually pretty well in this, and is escalate the street driving aspect of it in a way that I'd forgotten, as far as not necessarily the races, but at the end with, like, the scramble and things like that. I really enjoyed those ideas because they're not outlandish. It's very doable. I mean, eventually that warehouse couldn't have stored that many cars, don't get me wrong. But it's really cool. Whereas in the later films, so excuse me, you get more of the big destruction and the big destroying pieces. But this felt a bit simpler and a bit more kind of easy to follow as far as that sort of action went. And I really enjoyed it. I liked the jump in the race. I've got something special for you. It was that kind of build into what these movies become again.
There are some nice action moments in the film, and I guess that brings me to the way this film looks and a technical perspective, because I do have mixed feelings on that. This film has some really nice moments where we actually showcase actors driving, which shows you that they can actually drive. Now, don't get me wrong, there are, of course, lots of other standard Hollywood tricks, but there are quite a few moments in the film where you can see Paul Walker actually did drive that vehicle. It's a long shot. We can see him in the vehicle with the window down. We see the entire car. We see him do a handbrake turn and pull up to camera and deliver a line. There's some nice driving here from the actors, and Paul Walker, being a car enthusiast, actually was able to do some of that himself. And we weren't seeing much of that in the first movie. It was more sort of a standard kind of way that those cars were sort of shot. So it was nice to see some of his skill actually on show in the film, and then to see it realized, not in a big way, but with those hints of what we would see in like a Tom Cruise film, that kind of idea with the action. So there's also a couple of moments where they do some nice, interesting shots when they're going from car to car on the go as they're actually driving through. So there's some nice things here, but at the same time, the flip side of all that, this movie is shot mostly, in my opinion, in a fairly conventional and fairly flat kind of way. There's a lot of stuff in broad daylight, flat lighting, fairly uninteresting. I do understand that we're in Miami. There's a lot of sunshine down there, but at the same time, it didn't have too much of what I'd call a flair in terms of a visual sensibilities. There's some interesting colors going on with, there are some very bright t-shirts in this film. This is the brightest t-shirts I think I've ever seen. Like we're all wearing primary colors. We match our cars. It's a little bit hilarious in that sense, but yeah, the movie itself, from a visual standpoint, didn't have a huge amount to capture me as someone who looks at, I guess, the technical side, or how intricate is the lighting, what's the mood like, that kind of thing. So
one thing you reminded me of as you were talking about that, you talked about the shirts and the color. Paul Walker's costuming in this film is atrocious.
yeah, it's
the
it's
jean
very
shorts, the
it's very
jorts.
hard.
Oh,
It's hard to get on board with the shorts and t-shirt. It's just difficult. And I noticed that they didn't do that to Tyrese. I feel like someone might have had it in for Paul Walker. They're like, man,
or
it's going to be
Tyrese just
short.
said no.
Or Tyrese just said no. Yeah. But for Walker, it's like, it's shorts and a t-shirt for you, my friend. You know,
Yeah.
it doesn't quite work. It doesn't
It
quite
feels
work.
very daggy. Like, it just feels very, like, not fashionable when everything else in this film is all about the thing looking the best it possibly can.
Yeah. I noticed that you are enjoying the primary colors yourself today. Is that in honor of Too Fast, Too Furious?
No, I'm just in my Jimmy Jams.
So, look, we have this movie which is almost, too much too fast, while at the same time being, I'm going to call it, it's paper thin. There's not much going on here. They talk a lot about the plot, but the plot is just not that complicated, and we don't need that much time talking about it. While at the same time, there's almost no quiet moments between the characters. There's functionally two where Tyrese, his character is trying to forgive Brian's character for something that Brian didn't even do, which happens predictably just before the finale of the film. But aside from that 30 seconds, the rest of it's like, we got to get from here to there. We got to get that car. We got to get that money. We got to do this race. We got to do this thing. We got to, and it's just, but of course, the things that are actually happening, it's very, very standard take down the drug lord sort of stuff. So without the visual interest, without the, character work, without, I guess, any of the connective tissue to the previous film, you are just left with a film that is interesting because of its historical place in the Fast and Furious world. That and one other thing.
Oh,
This is the first time that we see Brian O'Connor drive his signature Nissan Skyline. And that's cool. But again, this is a historical franchise thing, right? That car became synonymous with that character throughout the several sequels, but this is the first time we see it. And truth be told, the first time we see it is in the turbocharged prelude for Too Fast, Too Furious.
So let me set this up. We're toing and froing, working out when to record the podcast this week. And Jim's like, oh, wait. You also have to watch this, which is called, what's it called?
It is called the turbocharged prelude for Too Fast, Too Furious.
Which is effectively a flip book of scenes that are linking Fast and the Furious to Too Fast, Too Furious. It feels a lot like they shot this to put it in the movie, cut it out, and thought, well, we can just do this.
Not quite. So, do you know what this is? So, first of all, the only place you can find this now, unless you have a DVD copy of The Fast and the Furious, the first one, the only
So
place
it's
you
not
can
even on
find.
the DVD copy of Too Fast, Too
Well,
Furious?
here's the thing. Let me set up what this is. And this is why I kind of love this, even though it is what it is, right? So you can find this on YouTube, the turbocharged prelude for Too Fast, Too Furious. It's about 6 minutes long, and it is, I guess you would call it a short film. However, there's no dialogue. It's mostly a montage, and it follows Brian O'Connor's character from the end of the first film really into how he got to Miami and got set up and that sort of thing. This was then released as a bonus feature on special editions of the Fast and the Furious DVD to boost DVD sales prior to Too Fast, Too
Okay.
Furious coming out. So, and I kind of love this as an idea because it's not something we see very much anymore.
Because it's awful.
It's that idea that the studio is trying to, they care about the home media market. Let's just think about that for a second and how crazy that is. But then B, they actually want to drive sales. So they put an exclusive something on the DVD there, which then causes people to purchase or repurchase the DVD and drive up sales before they get to the next movie. Now, of course, that means that this has all of the budget of a DVD extra, okay? which is to say, yeah, which is to say absolutely none. There's any money that they had on this short film went to paying Paul Walker for appearing in it, okay?
I have a question about it.
Yes.
The girl in this short film,
Yes.
do you think she's possibly a serial killer? Because the way she stalks and knows exactly who he is and helps him flee the cops is not normal. She's broken.
Well, actually, there's a little bit of, Hollywood lore and trivia there. So, in the turbocharged prelude for Too Fast, Too Furious, I will continue to refer to it by its full and correct name.
And I approve.
That girl who shows up in it, who is unnamed in the short film, we can't call her by a character name because we just don't know what it is. But it was rumored, and it is sort of Hollywood lore, that is supposed to be the Eva Mendes character from Too Fast, Too Furious, which would actually explain why Brian recognizes her when she shows up at his first race. However, it's basically impossible to find anything to corroborate that story. And it's kind of just one of those mysteries in the end. It doesn't have any real basis. No one's really said that this is what is happening, but it's definitely a fan theory. It's out there. People want it to be real. And who's to say whether or not it is or if it's not? But this short film, let's call it a short film. Let's say it's a short film.
Okay.
It is a montage, but it is something that they use every low budget trick in the book, and it looks low budget, it feels low budget, but that kind of makes it fun, in my opinion,
They
as
even
well.
use the Indiana Jones maps.
Yeah, they use the Indiana Jones maps. They crossfade things together. They use stock footage a lot in this particular short. So it's good fun. It's also ridiculous because he finds somehow his signature Nissan Skyline in a used car dealership. Now, I've said before, I am not a car enthusiast, but even I know that was one of the most sought after vehicles of the early 2000s. And the idea that he picked it up for nothing in a used car dealership is functionally impossible.
The kid from the dealership didn't want to let it go.
Yeah.
But he was also dressed like a clown. So
it's people have said that this is actually more unbelievable than the EMP grappling gun, that vehicle would be available in the used car dealership for him to purchase. So I do find that fun. So look, and it gave us another little feature there to look at. So if you are a Too Fast, Too Furious fan and you came along for this journey, hit up YouTube for the turbocharged prelude for Too Fast, Too Furious, because it's a good time.
It's turbocharged and a prelude. Everything is on the label. So we watched this film, and as I said, I enjoyed it a lot more. I feel bad that we can't really talk about Eva Mendes' character because, to be fair, Eva Mendes' character doesn't do much.
No.
She is a fulcrum. She makes the plot kind of turn a little bit, but that's about it. She doesn't get much to do in this film. The last thing I want to talk about is the car jump at the end onto the boat. I feel like either this is stealing from something or other things have stolen from this since we've done this, or it's just a trope. But I think it's one of the better versions of the car jump into an unlikely thing that I've seen on film. Like the whole, like, it doesn't make sense. Even if you watch it when they hit the jump, it doesn't look like they're about to hit a jump. But the way it kind of sails through, hits the car, and then the damage to them as they hop out of the car, I actually kind of really appreciate it as a total unit. You don't
Okay.
like it?
Look, I don't mind the car jump just because I think it's absurd. I just think it's absolutely silly. They talk about it just before they do it, saying this is some Dukes of Hazzard
Yeah.
stuff, and I'm like, yes, it is. It's Dukes of Hazzard. It's ridiculous. Again, I don't think it fits particularly well in this film. So look, the car jump, it doesn't work for me. I don't love it.
Because I'm a wrestling fan, I love those things, and that they sell it at all, like that there is damage to them at all, just makes me happy. Because there's plenty of films where that sort of stuff doesn't happen, and they just hop straight out of the car and they're good to go. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I enjoyed it. It did give me that little hit of like dopamine going, oh, that's good. I like that. So hey, look, that's why we're different though.
Yes, that's true. And it's funny because there are other scenarios where I think if I was enjoying the main, I guess, content of the movie and having a really good time, then that's where that car jump at the end feels like a payoff and I'm having a great time
It's
with it.
almost
But
like a Chekhov's car jump though, because they do the car jump at the start of the film across the bridge, and they're kind of like one-upping it at the end. It's like, hey, we showed you a car jump, we're going to show you a car jump to end. So I don't know.
yeah.
I like the bookend.
Yeah, look, I don't know. Who's to say? You're welcome to like it. It's no problem whatsoever.
I'm to
So
say, I'm right.
I have got something for you for next week, but do you have anything else to say about Too Fast, Too Furious?
No, look, let's just say we've started a journey. Let's just say that we will watch all of these films. And I'm excited to continue the adventure into the new year with possibly more Fast and the Furious, but I'm guessing not more Fast and the Furious next.
No, why don't you tell the good people of the interwebs where they can find us, and then I will tell you what we're doing next.
Well, because we're Jim and Ben and we're on a movie adventure, you can find us at Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures on YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes. If you want to check us out on social media, we're also Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures on TikTok, and on Instagram, we're Jim_and_Ben. So, Jim, what movie are we watching next week?
Well, this is going to annoy you because although you did it to me. You know the thing with sequels where I don't pick the first one?
It's
You
true.
just did it.
It's
You
true.
just did
I
it.
did just
so
do
I
it.
feel like I get a free pass right now because I'm about to do the same thing again to you. But I thought it would be fun to say, okay, look, Vin Diesel famously turned down this movie. He didn't like the script, okay? So what was he doing at this point in time? What was the thing that he decided to, turn this down for? And there are actually two choices here. There are two ways to go. You might know both of them.
I'm pretty sure I know at least one of them.
And I'm going to do another classic Jim thing, and I'm going to make you choose. Okay. So I'm going to make you choose. He had two projects that were happening at the time, and at various points in time, both of them have been cited as the reason he did not do Too Fast, Too Furious, aside from the fact that he did not like the script. Okay. So, A, do you know what both those projects were? And B, do you know which one do you think we're going to look at?
I feel like one of them was Riddick based. And I'm feeling it's the is it, I forget what the sequel to Pitch Black is. Is it Riddick? Is it
You've got it. Look, it was the first one is the first sequel to Pitch Black, which
Yep.
is called simply The Chronicles of
That's it.
Riddick. Okay,
Yep.
so now obviously that's a series that's very close to his heart, and there was a second film, which is also sometimes given as the reason that he wasn't going to do Too
Triple
Fast, Too
X?
Furious. Which was Triple X. Well done. So you now have a choice. We can either watch The Chronicles of Riddick or Triple X.
Well, I've seen one and I haven't seen the other. So I'm going to pick
We
one.
must choose the one of these you haven't seen.
Oh, I'm going to pick the one we haven't seen, which is Triple X.
Oh, wow.
I've seen the sequel to Triple X.
Oh, wow. Wow. You haven't seen Triple X. Okay. Wow. That's a recalibration for me on you as a human being that you haven't actually seen.
I feel like you failed me in this one.
So I kind of feel like I have too. So look, we're going to watch Triple X from 2002, where we can watch Vin Diesel as none other than Secret Agent Xander Cage, who is also an extreme sports enthusiast. And that is exactly what it sounds like.
Well, I'm really looking forward to it because, as I said, I haven't seen it. And look, this podcast has been fast. It's been furious. It hasn't been too. So thank you so much for joining me this week, Jim.
See you next week, Ben.
Bye.